Hey everybody, my name is Abdulbasit and welcome to my channel where I teach you how to become a software engineer from first principles. In this video, we'll be diving deep into string slices in Rust and how to use them correctly in your Rust code. Alright, let's get started. So the first function you see on my screen basically takes in a string and returns the index of the first space in the string, okay, which logically means that all the indexes before the returned index are part of the first word in the string. So you shouldn't really bother about what iter and enumerate does for now. I'll create a tutorial for those in another video. But in general, the asByte method converts your string to an array of bytes, right? And for each index and item in the string, if the item is a space, the if statement returns the index of that space, right? So let's test this function out by creating a string called x and fetch the index of the first space. Let's mute x because let's write Abdulbasit loves Rust. All right, so let's try printing the last index variable. Let's run our code. All right, so as you can see, this returns index 10, which is the index of the last space, right? So, and like I said before, all the indexes before this space belong to the first word, okay? All right, now I'd like to point out something in the last index variable. Note that even though the first function receives a reference to the string x, it actually returns a usize type, all right? So it returns a usize type. So therefore, even though we passed in a reference to x in the first function for the last index variable, this immutable reference is dropped once this function ends and isn't returned to the last index variable. All right. And this is basically because the return type is of the type usize. That's what's returned to the last index variable, which essentially means that since there is no immutable reference to x yet, we can create and use a mutable reference in this scope, all right? And you recall that we can't have and use both a mutable and immutable borrow of the same variable in the same scope, all right? So let's try creating a mutable reference to x by clearing the x string and printing the last index variable. All right, so let's clear x. So now that x is cleared, let's try printing the last index variable. Now let's run this code and see what it outputs. Now you'll realize that the code above works because we only have one mutable reference of x, which is the clear method used on x here, all right? But then notice that the last index variable still maintains the previous value, which is 10. Okay, this is because last index owns the return value and did not actually borrow from X. All right, which essentially means that it's not in any way connected to X, right, and won't be affected by whatever happens to X. But this is not something we want, right? Because this essentially, renders last index useless, right? But still accessible. Okay, we want to keep last index variable and the X string in sync, such that if changes are made to X, if we make any change to this X variable here, then you shouldn't have access to the last index variable anymore, right? So this is where string slices come in. So essentially what a slice does is it creates a pointer to a predefined part of the string, right? And to create a slice, you have to specify the starting index and the ending index of the string. Just like in most programming languages, the ending index is not inclusive. So if you are specifying index 0 to 4, the slice will actually point to index 0 to 3. All right. So let's take a string u, for example. Let's create a new string called u. All right. So we can create a slice of the first three positions of the string by running the following code. We can say let first 3 equal reference to u 0, 3. All right. So as I said earlier, if you want to create a slice, you start with the starting index. In this case, it's 0, and the ending index, which is 3 in this case, and two dots in between. All right. So let's try printing first 3. Let's run our code. All right. So as expected, it returned the first 3 items in variable u. It returned I, returned the space, and returned L. All right. So that's how a slice works. It basically returns the bytes from the starting index up to and not including the ending index specified. All right. So there are actually shortcuts to write slices. In this case, since we are starting from the first index, we can remove the 0, right, and it will still return the same results. In a similar fashion, if we were returning all the indexes down to the last index, we can remove the last index number. All right. So this basically returns all the numbers from the first index down to the last index. So let's run that and see. So it basically returns everything, right? I love Rust. All right, now that we know how to use slices to reference a string, let's make our first function better, such that if the string passed into this function changes, we will no longer have access to any variable that uses this function with that string. Okay. So first, let's change the return type to a reference to a string. So instead of use size, this time let's use a reference to a string. All right. So in the if statement, instead of returning the index once we see a space, we return a slice of string f. All right. A reference, we return a slice of string f. All right. Slice from 0 up to I. So this essentially returns slice from the indexes of the indexes of I. The first word. So this essentially returns here we
the
simply
index of the first word.
return s.
We have
So
to
here we
change
simply
this to
return s.
small letter. All right, so
Let's try running this code and see if it works.
all right.
So let's run this and
So
let's
notice that it's now
see.
giving us an error. It's telling
So
us
let's
that
run
cannot
this
borrow
and
x as
let's
mutable because it
see.
is also borrowed as
All right,
immutable.
we have to change
Right.
this
We are
to
getting this error because
small
in this
letter.
case
All right,
we
so
are
let's we have to
returning an
change
immutable
this
reference. We are
to the
returning
string small letter
balize
to
all right, so
the last
let's
index
index now that
variable.
we
So
are
notice
returning
that let's try running the
actually
code and
returning
see if it
this
works to the
reference
string
to
s.
x.
All right.
Notice that
So
let's
notice
try
that
running
it's
this
but
code and
then
see if
we
it
take
works
a mutable
an error
reference to
telling
x
us that
in the
so
mutable
notice
borrow
that it's
occurs
now
here,
giving
okay, and
us
then we try to
cannot borrow
use the
x as
immutable
telling us
reference
that it
in
is
mutable
also
borrow
borrowed
occurs
as
here.
immutable.
All right,
Cannot borrow x
we
as
this code
mutable
won't work
because
because we already have a
in this
mutable
case
reference to
as
x, and now we
immutable
are trying to
returning an
use
immutable
an
reference.
immutable
We are
reference
getting
to
this error
x in the print
because in
statement.
this case
Okay,
we
but
are
recall that we
returning
can't
an
have both
immutable
indexes
reference and
variable.
immutable
So
references
we
to the
string
same
actually
variable in the
returning
same scope.
the
This
last
reference, hence
index
there's no way
variable.
this code
So
will
all
run.
right,
This is
actually,
in
but then
contrast to
we
when
take
the
a mutable
initialized type has been
reference
returned,
x,
in
all
which
right,
case
in
there was no
but
immutable
then
borrow
we
being
take a
returned
mutable
and then
reference
we
the
try
last
to
x
use the
index
immutable
variable
reference
in
in a
the
print
clear
and
method
this
statement,
error is
okay,
good,
and then
right?
we try to
Because
use
it
the
basically
immutable this code won't
ensures
work
that
because we
in
already
a
have a
print
mutable
if
reference
the
to
x
x, and now we are
string
trying to
all right,
use
and
if
if
this
we
code won't
change
work
x
because we
in the
already
print
have a
statement
mutable reference to
with
x,
the
but
clear
recall that
method,
we can't
then we will
use
no
an
longer have
immutable
access
reference
to
to
any
x in the
variable
print
that
statement.
uses a
Okay, but
reference
recall
in the
that we
same
can't
scope
have
to the
both
string,
hence there
right?
will no
And
way
this
this code will
reduces
run.
the
To the
occurrence of
same
bugs in
variable
our
in
code in the
contrast
same
to
scope.
when a use
Hence,
size type
there's
was being
no way. I
returned
hope
code
you
will
took
run.
something from this
There
tutorial.
was
Don't
no
forget to hit the
contrast to
subscribe
when
button
a
and
use
see
size
you in
type
the
was being
next one.
returned, in which
Thanks for
case
watching.
there was no
And
immutable borrow being
this error
returned
is good,
to
right?
the last
Because it
index
basically
variable.
ensures that
And
if
this
the
x
this error is good,
string
right?
is
Because
changed
it
if
basically
we change
ensures that
this string like we did
if the
with
x
the clear method,
string,
is
then we will no
changed
longer
if
have
we
access to
change
any
this string
variable
like we
that
did
uses
with
a
the
reference,
clear method
then
to
we
the
will no
string,
longer have
right?
access to
And
any
this
variable
reduces the
that
occurrence of
uses a
bugs in our code
reference
to the string, right?
Alright guys,
And
I
this
hope you took
reduces the
something from this
occurrence of bugs
tutorial.
in
Don't
our
forget
code.
to hit the subscribe button and see you in the
Alright
next
guys, I
one.
hope you took
Thanks
something
for
from
watching
this
this
tutorial.
tutorial. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.